The big inauguration coming up and a lot of firsts, a lot of things that have never happened before have gone on during this campaign, and it seems to be continuing as we go into the big day, Inauguration Day, on Friday. On the line right now is Sam Rosenfeld. He is a professor, a visiting professor, assistant professor of government at Hamilton College. Professor Sam Rosenfeld, good morning.
Morning to you.
So what do you think? We've had a lot of firsts during this campaign. And Trump is saying that one of the firsts is going to be making some undoing of what a lot of things that executive orders that President Obama might have done. He'll be doing that right away. Going to happen on Friday, or will it be Monday?
I have no doubt. That's a perennial pastime of new presidents. They come in and undo some of the kind of major executive orders. I remember back George W. Bush came in and undid a lot of kind of labor regulations that Clinton had put in towards the end of the presidency. So I would not be surprised to see a lot of that happening on Friday.
How about the one thing that is a first, or is it the boycotting? We're up to nearly over 40 Democratic legislators are right now saying they are not going to the inauguration. Is this unprecedented?
As far as I know, that's definitely unprecedented. Yeah. Needless to say, this was triggered by the spat between Congressman John Lewis from Atlanta and Donald Trump. That was first spurred by Lewis's comments about not considering Trump a legitimate president, given the questions about Russia's involvement, and then Trump fueled the fire over Twitter, well-timed right before Martin Luther King Day, given Lewis's background. But that's been growing. Unsurprisingly, you saw the sort of core of the Democrats first stepping out to say they stand with Lewis in solidly blue districts, but the numbers have been growing to the point where there are a few congressmen who have signed on to this that have upwards of 30-40% Trump voters in their district.
Right.
There's a boldness right now that Democrats are feeling. I think that anyone in the opposition, after the shock of a loss, they're starting to kind of feel their oats a bit, both on sort of taking on Trump and his legitimacy, and then also mobilizing around the fight over Obamacare, which has turned into more of a fight than I think a lot of Republicans expected.
Some of the things, it seems that, for instance, Obamacare, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
It seems that there's a plan out there to repeal and then replace, and that's the plan that Republicans have. And then there seems to be a plan that the president-elect has, and the two might actually be in contrast with each other.
Absolutely. I mean, as is typical with Trump, he speaks with a salesman's gusto about how great the plan that he's putting in the works is, but it's very hard to say what is going to be in it. There's now been reporting that they've deliberately kept Tom Price, his nominee for Health and Human Services Secretary, out of the administration to B's plans for Obamacare, precisely so that he wouldn't be asked about it during. He would be able to say he doesn't know anything about it during the confirmation hearing. Tom Price has a long track record of actual Obamacare replacement plans. They won't do anything near what Donald Trump is saying he wants to do, which is essentially cover everybody, have it be cheaper and better insurance than Obamacare. How he plans to get to that, and sort of how the benchmarks of what anything the Republicans have wanted to do, it's very hard to say.
It's almost kind of a CEO. We've always talked about over the years. Boy, sometimes CEOs do not make the best politicians, and in this case, president, because Donald Trump can sit in a boardroom and say, "This is what I want. Figure it out.
Make it happen." Right.
Make it happen. There's a process here. It's going to be interesting to see how all of this works, because it does seem that Donald Trump is going down that road and ultimately could be clashing with his own congressional leaders.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, this is I cannot stress enough how queasy I would be if I were a congressional Republican right now. You have this moment of incredible opportunity to get a lot done, and they will get a lot done given unified control of the government. But, right out of the gate, they're pursuing something they had promised to do for 6 years now, and finding, that lo and behold, the laws of political gravity still exist, and it is very, very politically difficult to take away people's benefits that have actually put into place. It's much easier to block something from getting implemented in the first place than taking it away from people. So they already have their own political difficulties with getting rid of Obamacare. And at the same time, they have a president who it's made clear he has no interest in going out of his way to provide cover or assistance to congressional Republicans on this issue whatsoever. And so you're already in treacherous waters, and then you have a president who is going to be very willing to throw curveballs to the national press. It makes it really tough.
How far do you think this administration will go when it comes to Roe v. Wade, when it comes to Supreme Court justices?
Well, I have, during the election, during the campaign, they had a kind of Heritage Foundation approved list of very conservative justices to replace Antonin Scalia. Unless Trump is really feeling in a rambunctious mood, I would not be surprised to see one of the people from those lists getting nominated to fill Scalia's place. And, because it's replacing already a very conservative justice, I don't imagine it's going to cause a particular amount of controversy. There's nothing that I doubt Democrats would mount a filibuster against it. If they did, I think they'd get rid of the filibuster on Supreme Court nominees right away. The real question is going to be if other vacancies open up in the court down the line, in which case you get a genuine rebalancing of the ideological direction of the court on issues like Roe v. Wade and everything else.
What about the, I know in your book, the Polarisers, Post-War Architects of Our Partisan Era. Boy, you're just, you're on the topic, because I don't know that we've ever been, and maybe we have been, but it doesn't feel like we've ever been as polarized as we are today.
No, you could point possibly to the 1850s, which is not a hopeful historical comparison. The part of the point of the book is, offering a history of the actual people who were involved in kind of reshaping American politics. But we've been in eras before when the parties were as disciplined in their voting, sort of operating as kind of political armies that were opposed to one another. Like, you think back to what was called the party period of the late 19th century, the Gilded Age. Statistically, you could see Congress in those days behave just as partisan as they did today. The difference is, back then, what they were mainly voting on and organizing politics around was patronage, was distributional politics, who was going to get goodies and largesse from the government, et cetera. What's happened in the last few decades is that the parties have become disciplined around distinct ideologies, distinct agendas that are mutually very different, and the parties are increasingly internally cohesive around those ideologies. That means that you're marrying a kind of tribal partisan team spirit to genuine differences in outlook and worldview that makes looking across the partisan divide, you start to feel much more like you're looking at people who just share completely different values and outlooks for the country.
Well, Obama had control of the House and the Senate when he went into office, and it led to a lot of things getting done. Things that caused enough controversy to cause a real problem with the midterm elections. What's your prediction here for the next 2 years?
Well, so, out parties always, or not always, but typically do well in the midterms. Democrats have a huge, because as a consequence, in part, of having president for 8 years in office, have suffered huge losses beneath the national presidential level in their bench, particularly state legislatures, and then obviously Congress as well. And so, you got to hit bottom to rebuild, and I don't think there's anything more of a sort of, you couldn't think of a more promising recruitment tool for Democrats to mobilize and organize and build up their bench than harnessing opposition to President Trump. On the other hand, the difference between Republicans and Democrats in their demographic constituencies is that Republican voters tend to turn out at midterm elections in much higher numbers than Democrats. So Democrats have a midterm election problem even in times when they're in the R party. So it's going to take a lot of actual organizing and mobilization to make something happen in 2 years. This is something that there's a fight right now for DNC chair that's happening, and this is one of the kind of subjects of debate. How do you actually solve Democrats' midterm problem, the problem with their own voters not turning out in non-presidential years?
Yeah.
That's the subject of debate.
Okay, so just your opinion. A lot of people very hopeful that Donald Trump will not be the typical politician, that there will be change for the better. Some even making the comparison to Ronald Reagan. If you had to call it, what are you going to call it for the next 4 years?
Well, absolutely, Donald Trump will turn out not to be the normal politician. I think that's been made clear in the last month. Since he's come back doing the press conference and then this big interview he just did with Great Britain and Germany, as a reminder, he is who he is. This is how he campaigned. That's how he's going to approach governance. It is hard for me to conceive of Trump managing to put together a governing approach and a coalition in Congress and other parts of the government to enact both changes and a politically kind of regenerative arrangement like we saw in the Ronald Reagan years. The Republicans really built up their party under the sort of effective governance of Ronald Reagan. I don't see that happening. I just don't. Reagan, while he himself was originally a celebrity and an outsider, et cetera, he was a real party man, someone who had come up through California Republican politics and was interested in building a kind of sustaining partisan and governmental majority in the U.S. And Trump isn't. Trump came into this somewhat accidentally, I think, even from his own perspective. And I don't know if he's temperamentally interested in doing the work of building something more lasting. So we'll see.
We will see. I got to tell you one thing. It's going to be interesting.
Yes, very interesting times.
That is for sure. Professor Sam Rosenfeld over at Hamilton College. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll break.